Hi, my name's Hilary Stupa and I'm a developer with qDabra software. And today I want to talk to you about using qRules for copying complex repeating data from one data source to another in your InfoPath form. If you're a qRules user, you may have already used the copy table command. That works very well if your target and source data structure are the same. But that's not always the case in a real-world scenario. We have some different methods we can use to copy data between data sources in those cases, and today I want to demo one for you. Here's the form I'm going to be using, and the data source in question is right here. It's our repeating book group, and you can see it's got an interior group called publisher info and another interior group called copyright info. In an instance like this, copy table isn't going to work for us, even though our destination data source and our target data source look the same. Let me show you that target data source. So here we are, it's our complicated group. We've got a story, an author, a publisher, and a copyright. You've probably noticed that the names aren't exactly the same between my groups. That's perfectly fine. We don't have to have our names the same. And you don't have to have the same names even if you're using the copy table command. But with the copy table command, the limitation is that the data sources need to have the same number of attributes and elements. But another limitation is that they can't have nested groups like we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and preview this form so you can see what's going on with it right now. So here's my form in preview mode. You can see I've got a single blank main data source node here. This is my repeating book node. And down below for my complex structure, this is my secondary data source, and you can see I've got information here just for different books. I've kind of outlined my publisher and my copyright group there so you can see my nested groups. And as you can see, I've got 3 instances here of this particular repeating group in my secondary data source. The secondary data source in this form is just an XML file. I'll make sure to post this form up at infopathdeb.com and include a link with this video so that you'll be able to find the sample form and give it a try. It'll be injected with a trial of qRules, so you'll need to re-inject it with your trial. So I have logic already in this form on my copy button, and we're just going to walk through what that logic is. We'll look at Manage Rules here. Now, the first thing I'm doing in my logic is I'm deleting rows. Why am I doing that? Well, when I previewed my form, you could see by default I have a single main data source node. It's this book node right here. We have 2 approaches we can use to get rid of that book node. One is to delete it, and the other is to not include it in the first place. So in my copy button, I've taken the approach of deleting it. I'm setting a field's value. It's the command field in the qDabra rules data source, and the command is delete, and here's the X path to the book node. Now, no matter how many of these I have inserted, the delete command is going to remove them. It's going to remove all instances that exist of the book node. The other option we have here is under data and default values. You can see that by default we're including the book node. Now we could choose to just simply not include it when the form is open. So that's another alternative for you. Since we're looking at qRules today, I thought I'd use the qRules way. And just to kind of show you what I would do if I were creating this form from scratch, I'm going to disable that insert rows rule. I usually like to build my rules up gradually. So sometimes I'll add a rule and test it, add a rule and test it. So at this point, the only thing this copy button is going to do is delete my existing main data source node. And you can see it did just that. So even if we'd included multiples of these by default, even if we had numerous instances of book, we'll just go ahead and add another one just for fun. And say OK, and now preview. You can see we have 2 instances right now, and when I click this button that's going to run just the delete command right now, you can see they're both deleted. I've set those defaults back to just include a single instance of my main data source node. My next rule here is the one to insert the rows, and I'm going to go ahead and enable that rule and we'll take a look at it. And this rule simply runs an action on the command field, sets the command field to a value. Now in this case I'm using a concat statement, and the reason I'm using a concat statement here is I want to insert the number of book nodes of a count that's equal to the count of nodes in my secondary group. So I have this secondary data source, it has 3 of these nodes, and since I want to copy data from that secondary data source into my main data source, well, obviously my first step is to make sure I have the right amount of main data source nodes. And I'm just going to cancel out of here and cancel out of here. I'm also going to disable some rules that I already have set here, so that they don't impact us when we preview. I just want to show you the insert working, and then we'll take a look at those final rules. So we'll preview our form, and our copy button now is going to delete and insert 3 rows. And you can see I've used a little logic here to show in a field what command I'm running. And you can see I have 3 rows. So finally, let's re-enable these and we'll talk about what these rules are doing. The first rule is setting a counter field, and this counter field is in a secondary data source that I added simply for use in logic. I don't like to clutter up my main data source with things I don't need. So I have a counter field here. I'm calling it book counter, and when I run this rule, what I'm setting it to is the count of preceding siblings. So let's talk about what's happening. I'm running my insert command, and each time I insert a new book node, the first thing that happens is the counter field I'm using gets set to the count of the preceding sibling book nodes plus 1. In other words, it's setting it to the index of the row. So the first row is going to set the counter to 1, and the second row is going to set the counter to 2, and the third row is going to set the counter to 3, and so on. Now, if I were using a filler form, I could simply use the position function to get the row I'm on. But in browser forms, as of IPFS 2010, we still don't have that function available to us. So in general, I just use count preceding sibling. The next set of rules is going to actually set the fields in my form. And you can see I'm setting title, author, year, name, all of these data source fields. Let's just get back to the main data source so we all know what I'm talking about here. We're setting all of these fields within each book node. So a book node gets inserted. I set a counter to let me know what row I'm on, and then I set the title field, for example, to the value of my group, using my book counter to indicate which instance I want. So let's look at the XPath for this. So what I've done when I create this formula is I would select, for example, the story field using the insert field or group picker, and then I would add this function right here by hand. So let's go ahead and just redo this. I'll just remove that entirely. We're going to insert a field or group. I'm going to go to my target, my source data, right here, and I want a story node. However, I want a very specific story node. I'm going to say OK, and you can see I've got the XPath. If the XPath isn't showing, you just tick this checkbox. Now, I need to indicate which of these story nodes I need, so I need to filter this XPath. And I'm going to use the number function to make sure that my counter is treated as a number, and then I'll use insert field or group. I'll go to my form logic, and I'll grab my counter. And you can see now I've got this full XPath, and the formula verification accepts it. We say OK, we say OK. And all of these are like that. I'm setting every single field the same way, basically selecting the field and then selecting Edit XPath and adding in my function to pass in the correct instance that I want the data from. So finally, if we preview one more time, and we click copy, we can see that I've inserted my 3 items and I've copied in the same data from my original data source. I hope this gave you some ideas for ways you can use qRules in your form for copying data between data sources. As always, you can find more information on our website. You can post questions to our forum, and we have other videos available to help you on our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.